Welcome to the BPM 360 podcast. I'm Russell.
And I'm Casper. And together we will help you navigate the treacherous waters of the BPM adoption journey. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the BPM 360 podcast. I'm your host, Caspar, and with me is, as always, my trusted friend and co-host, Russell. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm fine. You may hear a bit of wind in the background, so obviously I'm sitting outside. It's Friday, and
Yes.
actually the location I'm in Düsseldorf, and as you know, we have regular co-working sessions with colleagues. And one colleague has moved back to Düsseldorf, and she's got a really nice loft here in Düsseldorf, and she invited us to have a co-working session at her place.
Oh, nice.
Due to the fact that I can't stop talking, I'm loud. I was told to go onto the balcony where I'm now, and but that's fine because the weather's great, and it's just an awesome day. So I'm looking forward to wrap this weekend up with or start this weekend with an awesome session with you. And our guest that we have.
Oh, we have a guest. Yes. Russell, would you do the honors today?
Absolutely. So I'm really thrilled and happy to have Stefan with us today. And we go back a couple of years. Actually, we started off, he was a customer of mine. So, so I've invited a customer, but also over a couple of years, he was also a colleague of mine. So that's a nice constellation.
Yeah.
And I said, this just shows the wonderful world of collaboration, how you can in tough projects, you can get to know each other and respect each other, that you even get to the level that you work together. And so I'm happy to have Stefan here today, Stefan Hauenschild. Welcome. And
Welcome.
Maybe, just Caspar doesn't know you. You don't know Caspar. So maybe we kick off the show, Stefan, that you give a bit of an introduction to Caspar and our audience about who you are, where you came from, and what we typically always try to put in context your CV and your life in the context of our big topic, BPM.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, Casper and Russell. So I'm
Pleasure.
excited to be here on your show. Not sure how to start actually my introduction. Maybe I start with the most current situation. So I'm a self-employed consultant. I'm supporting companies in facilitating change, accompanying the transformation, business transformation, but also organizational development projects and initiatives. And I also support as a coach individuals in leadership topics and all topics around responsibilities and how to lead people or lead companies in these very volatile times. So that's at the moment my focus of business.
How did you get in contact with processes in general? At some point in your life, you got into contact with them. So how did that happen?
Yeah, that's true. And actually, I already got in contact during studies. So my bachelor thesis was a simulation of the processes in a DHL parcel hub.
Okay.
I was asked to determine how many forklifts they would need if they reorganized their processes.
Okay.
And it was quite technical, though, with like Petri nets and UML language and trying to bring a huge simulation model into place. And then all the software failed because it was just not enough computing power back then available. So that was 2001. And I had to stop my work on this thesis, or I had to explain then why it didn't work out. So that was my first contact to processes, actually. Then afterwards, I went into consulting and did a lot of requirements engineering based on processes. So mapping the requirements for IT systems to the actual processes in government departments. And we used that a lot. Yeah, back then still EPK modeling. And and afterwards I I somehow got intrigued, and I got into process optimization, process design in the supply chain area. Went into line management situations in the chemical industry. Ran a lot of process optimization projects. And I got really intrigued then when I saw the process repository of the SAP project and thought, wow, this is a great repository. But then I had to understand that it was only the IT steps and the whole business context was missing. So
yeah. We all had that revelation at some point in our careers.
Yeah, exactly. And then I got frustrated when I saw that the quality department had its own process repository.
Yeah.
And nobody really knew that, and all this kind of things. Yeah, I mean, you all know that from the beautiful process management area.
But I just want to point this out. I mean, it's not often that I have a guest on the podcast with Russell that is, I would say, from a professional perspective, a clone of myself. And Russell might know this. I graduated in the topic of process simulation. I spent about 2 decades in the chemical manufacturing industry doing supply chain management, doing process optimization, doing SAP implementation. Why haven't we met before?
Don't know. It's really very, very similar. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you also went more and more into communication and stakeholder management and change management topics. Then, yeah. So,
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and that was also my way. I found out the hard way that the most beautiful process solution or IT solution doesn't work out if you don't incorporate the people and don't communicate well and don't take the stakeholders with you, and so everything crushes. And so that's actually when my passion for the people-centric approach started, and I went more and more into this change management, or I don't really like change management as a terminology. I would rather call it change facilitation. But so because
I can see that.
it's actually nothing you can manage.
No, and we'll definitely get back to the communication part. Because I think, as I discuss with Russell more often, and you can see it in the framework that we actually have in the picture. I mean, human affairs is something that is grossly underrated, typically in BPM projects, or in business transformation in general, I would say. But that's interesting. All right, cool. We got lots to talk about, that's for sure.
Oh, definitely.
But also it's interesting that we've had such a wide variety of people on the show, but people from software vendors, professors, etc. But typically, the most of the time when we're talking about the challenges and the lessons learned of these initiatives, we always come down to the fact of like the sponsorship. From a mandate perspective, like the top level, like standing behind the big idea, and then the nitty-gritty work of the human affairs, getting it, as you say, facilitating this change and this shift in mindset around process management and the related, let's say, transformations. And if I recall, there were what I still have in my. I always remember that how much emphasis Stefan put into the topic around change management, as he was a project manager for big planning, let's say, software introduction. So it was a lot about the planning software, but of course then, and that's what I quite liked, was that how strong it became apparent that the introduction of the planning makes you think about your planning and your procedures, and also what a big impact it would have on the way the people behave, and how they have been working, planning for themselves and acting accordingly. So the impact of introducing let's say a planning software would have a huge disruption on the whole, let's say, production community, and the way this really intense binding people into this procedure of understanding how they work now and how they're going to work in future, how the software can help or how it cannot help. I think that was really interesting to see, and also the way Stefan dealt with it. So that's what I. So, but when you look back, Stefan, at that, was that more like a thinking where you were thinking because we talked a lot later about how to standardize and bring up a method about this change facilitation. A lot of what you did and at that time, did you have the impression there were good templates out there? Was it something where you said, this is maybe something that should be done more standardized? Or how do you look back at that time from the approach you also took in managing the change or facilitating the change during that big initiative?
I think it was the first time that I actually tried to use process management holistically. Mm-hmm. So we started from the requirements engineering, from brown paper workshops on what needs some improvement, what is running well, and all that. Where comes the software into play, all the interfaces to other departments, like a huge interface to order to cash. We included all this order confirmation back then. And it also showed like the strength of BPM for change, because you could directly see which stakeholders you needed to involve. Yeah? So not sure if I would have involved finance or the compliance department into a production planning project if I wouldn't have really seen on the end-to-end process that there are significant interfaces to be considered. Credit limit blocks and compliance checks, all somehow involved in available to promise processes, and basically the production planning was the basic or the database for that, and so that was really interesting to see. And then we also used it for the communication for the to all the stakeholders to explain what's going to change. We used it for the training. We used it for general communication to other departments that were just somehow afraid of what's going on. And I think that was really cool. And not sure if it's, Russell, you asked about standardization. Is it really possible to standardize that? I'm not sure. So, I mean, it would have been wonderfully helpful if we would have the process models in place up front. But that's always a bit tricky.
Can imagine that.
So, but I think that was really a cool project, and in the end, it came down to the same story again. Yeah, we had a really good solution in place. It's up and running, but we really struggled with the stakeholder management. We had some upper management changes during the project, and then all of a sudden a completely different priority came in, and we had to really realign on this project so many times.
Heard that one before. I've heard that one before.
Not just heard it, been there before. Yeah,
been there. Yeah, so get a big T-shirt. Been there, done that. Like.
Yeah, we should have jackets saying that.
Yeah. And Caspar, maybe there's also another, because I'm just kind of recalling some, just talking to you, Stefan, I was, just pulling up some memories of things we've discussed in the past. What I also thought was quite cool is that we had a paper, I don't know if it was a webinar as well, where we were talking about the facilitation of change along a classical SAP project. And what I thought was quite cool about your idea there was you look at it as a big transformation. You're talking about the users, their process is going to change. They're going to have a different IT system. How do we cater for them? But when we think about these big initiatives, they even before they start, there is always a disruption by this project even being initiated. Yeah, so there's maybe sometimes mid-layer managers or process owners or the top-level management. They also are impacted by even just the let's say like the thought, the idea, the pre-project, the business case coming up, and all of a sudden you get a huge shift in focus on certain initiatives that stopped. People are reallocated to facilitate, to jump into the project. So the project in itself is a change, not only the effects of the project. Yeah. And so here Stefan, thought up of let's say a model to understand and facilitate better actually the roles accompanying the business transformation beyond just looking at the end user that needs training for the processes and the systems that are changing. And maybe you just give a quick insight in that. And as I said, I thought that was a really good model, which is a lot of the time neglected, how to actually combine, this topic change facilitation more in a holistic aspect of the whole business transformation impacting a business, even with the project itself.
Yeah, so I think that the basic idea is that different people do have different perspectives on change, and they do perceive the change individually. And you will never be really able to cover all the individual needs for support during a change, but you can get closer to it if you think of maybe different target groups that you want to accompany. And so what we did actually there, and it was not only me, Russell, but it's nice that you say so. But the idea was that we checked the environment of the project, who's there, which stakeholders are there, which groups are involved, which groups of employees are affected by the change, and then decide really for all the different groups on how do we want to tackle the change for them, how do we want to accompany them through the change, and we mapped this to the standard procedure of SAP process driven implementation, yeah? And said, okay, which of the work packages of this standard SAP project approach can we utilize for the change management? Where are we anyways in contact with these different group of people? And what do they get to know? What do they need to get to know earlier, or these kind of topics? And the main idea is to combine this now with like one of the standard models of change management, which dates way back to the 1960s, which is the Kübler-Ross change curve.
Yeah.
And it just shows how change impacts the confidence of people. And some are running through this curve faster, some slower, and so on. But the important thing for a large initiative like SAP implementations or change to S/4HANA or whatever is that they also get to know at different points of time about the project at all. Yeah? And they also need to get to know in different timings. So we definitely need to ensure that the leadership gets to know very quickly and gets into a supporting stage of the project early on. So they really need to move through this change curve of shock and defense and anger and depression and whatever, yeah? And then afterwards go into the support mode quite fast and in the very beginning, even though you don't have the details of all the changes that will happen, but you have to help them to get to this stage very early, whereas the end users, you don't help them if you push them into the change curve on the first day. So you need to make you need to think of when do we want to bring them in and how do we do this. And maybe some areas, some departments with a lot of change, you need to bring in earlier. And then this is basically the idea that we try to put into a standard methodology of change management for SAP projects.
And integrating it with the other streams around business readiness and IT readiness. So I think really aligning with the work packages that typically an Activate project may have, and then thinking about who are the involved people and when do we need people in a certain stage of the curve, or when will they need to be prepared so we don't have a disruption of the project itself due to some kind of like pushbacks from the organization. So a very integrated view on how to, on a detail level, cater for the different stakeholder groups, and I think it's a cool model. And definitely something that is a good framework to transpose to. Every project is different, every stakeholder group is different. There's always this, yes, there's a lot of individual like aspects, but I think having a basic thought model is always helpful. Yeah,
just to add on to that, Russell, just to add on to that, I mean, there is this one effect in change management theory that is useful here as well. I mean, I love the Kübler-Ross curve. It's sometimes called the morning curve. And when you go through a dramatic experience, I mean, it's the same curve. But there's also something that's called the marathon effect. And I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but I think this is interesting. Just bounce it off, Stefan, to see if you can resonate with that. So at the moment that you say, I have different groups of people that are going through that curve in different moments of time, that means that I need to line them up in my communication strategy, basically in the same way as a marathon is lined up, with the professional runners first, and then towards the end of the back, you have the slower people. Because for the listeners who don't know this effect, what the marathon effect basically says is that if you look at the marathon and you start with the professional runners, they start, and 2 hours later, they're finished. The people who are in the back, if you have a big marathon like the one in Berlin or in Rotterdam or in New York, it takes 2 hours before they get to the starting line from the back of the pack. And then they need to start running for like 4 or 5 or 6 hours. So when you go through a transformation project in an organization, and the top management and the project core team, they've been thinking about this and working with this for already months before the first regular employees will ever hear about it. So they very often have a mindset that they already know what's going on, and they think that the rest of the organization has the same mindset. And that's where very often they communicate either way too high level or way too fast into details, but they always forget to put the right context in place, which I think, Stefan, is where you have that timing across the Kübler-Ross curve for different groups of people. I think that really is an interesting concept. Does that make sense, or am I just talking gibberish right now?
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. That makes sense. It's kind of, if you go hiking and the fit people wait for the last ones, and then as soon as the last ones arrive, the first ones just continue walking. So they had a break, and
that's a nice analogy as well.
And the ones who really need the break, they don't ever get a break. Yes.
That's true. Yeah.
And it's kind of it's a risk. Because you also, and it's natural, right? You are like in the project, you are thinking about the changes like every day for months and months, and then you don't even think about that this could be new to others. Mm-hmm. And I think this is exactly also the beauty of the concept that we had back then, is really to utilize the project team as change, as a change team, or as change ambassadors, maybe even, to make them aware of the responsibility that whatever they talk to the organization is being perceived as an official message from the project. So the idea is really also to spend some time with the project team on change management continuously, and just keeping them aware of exactly this risk. So that's I think it's really it's the concept would help to save a lot of effort, because you integrate change management into the project work at many stages. You still have activities on top, definitely, but a lot of events or work packages in an ERP or IT project can be utilized in both ways.
And the good thing, I suppose, in concepts like that, if you do have a common understanding of what the actual project is about and the work package is about, then from a change facilitation, you can integrate better on that behalf. Actually, I have another thought as well. So when talking about process management, we're always so sometimes adamant about tools and methodologies as well. So we know we're focusing on sponsorship and human affairs, but around the governance and COE, a lot of the times there's a lot of nerdy talk about methods and tools, where in contrary, typically, when we're talking about change facilitation, it's all very soft. But I know, Stefan, that you've been done a lot of certifications, LinkedIn as a one proof for that, but also, always been running along with, say, all the things. So if you look at that, is it like, is it such a big contrast as some people feel it between, let's say, the very, say, binary thinking IT, let's say, not necessarily binary, but methodology thinking of BPMs and this, let's say, the soft skill thinking of change facilitation? Or is there also a lot of like tool sets, methodologies around change facilitation that are, let's say, same but different to what we see in a process management environment? What are say kind of like, just for somebody maybe who is listening to the podcast and is very much coming from the other side, from the dark side of BPM, and looking into this area. So what is your take on? Is it so different? Is it just a different mindset? Is it different people? Or is there a lot where you say no? But think of it this way: there are tool sets out there, methodologies that say have a different flavor to it. What's your take on that?
Well, it's definitely a different mindset. I think. The key to change facilitation is that you need to expect that it runs differently than you think it will. So you always need to expect the exception. You don't know how any kind of stakeholder is reacting today or tomorrow or whatever. Yeah. So it's also day-to-day different. And so you need to handle people, and it's not binary. That's for sure. But there are definitely toolboxes and frameworks for change management as well. And a lot of those are also quite process related, like the Kübler-Ross curve, which is also kind of an emotional process, with the emotions you run through. But there are also others from one very simple is Levin, unfreeze, change, freeze. And there are more to that. I guess there are 10 to 20 frameworks for change management that you could come up with. A lot of that like processual, and others kind of more on keep in mind different perspectives. I think McKinsey has a framework 7S with like different perspectives you should tackle, or ATCA is a quite famous one. And there are more. And so. But it's like in project management as well. You have a methodology, and then something happens, and you need to react. And I think all this agility topic, which is talked about a lot, and by now we are away from the VUCA world. We are in the Barney world, like brittle and anxious and non-linear and whatever. And so in the end, it's about observing what happens and reacting to it. And you need to have a plan, and then you have to adjust it. If you don't have a plan, you cannot sell it. You will not get support. So okay. You need a plan.
Yeah, I'm just saying. So this one aspect, binary versus managing uncertainty. It's like, but having having the not maybe just the guts, and also the capability to be able to react in an agile manner to all these uncertainties. I suppose that's a skill you need in any project nowadays. Anyway, it's like so no sure. matter. So we wish we have a world where we can plan, say a project plan. So who's had a project plan that has worked out as they planned it the first time round? And so I guess that's something. But if you take that as like, let's say there's this skill set that is maybe specifically is very important if you're in this, let's say, change facilitation business. It's definitely a skill I think that all project managers, BPM managers would need. What would your tip be how can you kind of like, what would be, say, are there any crash courses out there? Is there anything where you would recommend? Okay, if you don't have the time to do the full-fledged certifications on all these levels, but what is it like an approach to say, how can I get into that mode and the skill set and let's say maybe methodology or micro skills just to help me survive better with all this uncertainty that is just hitting me day in, day out around the aspect of human affairs and stakeholder management. Do you have any tips there for us or for our audience?
I'm not sure actually.
Probably if you think about it, we put it
probably I need to disappoint you. It's like listening closely what they say, the people. Trying to switch perspectives. And I think that's something that BPM or process consultants have a lot. They also need to switch perspectives and try to think of what's the daily life, how's the work, how's the process running on the day-to-day basis, and what would bother me if I would need to run it. So I think this switch of perspective is something that's quite in common for both roles. Okay. And otherwise, it's a lot of communication and leadership, and communication meaning both ways. It's not about
absolutely. Yeah.
But let me just. Oh, sorry, Russell.
No, Kasper.
So let's bring it very close to the process management topic. I talk to a lot of clients, and I try to be in there as early as I can before they start talking about tools, because then you're basically too late. So I get into the situation where I'm talking to clients, and one of my first questions always is, who's the executive sponsor for this project? Yeah. And then typically there is a long, awkward silence, and they go like, yeah, we don't know yet. So from your experience, Stefan, and having the toolbox that you have, what would be a tangible piece of advice that you would have for these kind of people in project management lead positions that typically are then they destined to be the COE lead? How can they find and how can they cultivate something like an executive sponsor from a change management perspective?
Well, what I like to do is to have a sound analysis of the project environment and really check who would be somehow involved, somehow also affected by BPM. That's for sure. And then in this range of people, you might be able to find a sponsor, but otherwise you might find some people who will support you to find a sponsor. That's also helpful.
Yeah, of course. You need to find that. I sometimes call it sugar daddy, which is a bit of an inappropriate term, but it does describe what an executive sponsor does. He makes sure that you're funded and that the doors will be opened. I
think that's quite. I really like BPM, and I think the connection to change or transformation and change facilitation is really funny, because you can utilize BPM a lot in order to facilitate change. And otherwise, implementing BPM is a big change in transformation. You guys are talking about this all the time in your podcast. But it's really like hen and egg sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, and it's true. And it took me. I switched sides about a year ago, so to speak, from a vendor perspective. And in both cases, doesn't matter where I was and doesn't matter where I am right now. In both cases, it took me considerable effort to even have the topic of change management being a standard part of the project plan. Because typically they just look at the technical implementation, and what happens is that implementation goes typically pretty well, because BPM, let's face it, it's not rocket science. It's just a lot of work with some common sense. But at the moment that you just do implementations technically, then very soon you will run into limitations of or consequences of things that you haven't thought through completely. And I think that's where the role of change management, and I'll just call it change management. I mean, I totally agree, Stefan, it's change facilitation, but the general term for that my customers understand is change management. But change management allows me to dig a little bit deeper with the customer and say, why are you doing this? Which I think is a very important question that gives you a lot of hooks for the rest of the approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, we should start with that.
Yes.
Why do you think you need BPM, and what do you want to achieve with that? And then we can talk about the how.
Yeah.
But
and so
if you don't know why, you will not convince anyone.
So many years ago, I would have said, if Caspar works for a software vendor, he's not going to ask the why. He's just going to say, how many licenses do you need?
No, I leave that to the commercial people.
Exactly, but seriously, nowadays it is astonishing that I think no software vendor actually doesn't really also ask this question because they know it's just a matter of days or weeks before that is the big question over which everything, even the budget, and of course also the budget will circle. Yeah. So the why, and what is the purpose? What do we want to achieve? What is going to what is the outcome? And I think it's interesting to see how much general dialogue is required. Sounds negative, but I said is actually is done in companies nowadays to sort this before they start moving on initiatives. And sometimes it seems like at the beginning they have a lot of discussion about the why, what they want to achieve, but they don't necessarily always follow through with it across the whole course of the time. Sometimes it gets forgotten, or they get lost, or the objectives change and it's not caught up with. But seriously, think about it. If you go back to the initiatives when you put down your project plan and your business case, and you're arguing for the budget, there is, on the top level management, there is a lot of discussion about, do we need this, and why are we doing this, and what are the risks and what is the impacts? Principally, it's all there. The question is how then, once that is decided, how people are taken along. Maybe the marathon effect is here again. Management's there, they're running, and they just expect everybody to follow, and without discussing it, and forgetting that sometimes they're taking deviations and plans are changing, and nobody's going back to actually reiterate and take the people along that have accumulated in this initiative, and all have to follow lead. So it's a very interesting aspect.
Well, now I have a question, Stefan, for you, and I'm going to stir up some things, and I love to stir up things. And Ross and I recently I think we had that topic on the show already more than once. It's the complementary relationship between enterprise architecture and BPM. Now, in your experience, I'm not sure if you have that experience, but let's see if you have that experience. At the moment that a process management project starts from, let's say, from within the domain of enterprise architecture, in my experience, and I'd love to learn yours, in my experience, that project tends to be much more technical than it is compared to when it starts from a BPM perspective. But is that the extent to which change management or change facilitation is taken into account, in my experience, seems to be a little bit higher when it comes from the BPM side compared to when it comes from the EA side. Is that something that you recognize, or am I just dreaming up stuff now?
I tend to agree, although I'm not an expert in enterprise architecture, but I think I see the same in general if the initiative gets done by the IT. So if it's coming from IT department, whether it's a new tool or it's the need to change the ERP or whatever, it's always about the tools and about the IT software, and it's not about the people. And always a strong word, and it's always wrong. But no, that's definitely what you can see. And I think always, if we would be able to really incorporate change facilitation into the project management approach and somehow combine this, then it would be much more meaningful to all the stakeholders, because they definitely will not question that there is a project manager required. But if this project manager could cover a lot of the change facilitation as well, then it would become much more natural to talk about it and to think about it. And it wouldn't feel like yet another additional meeting with the change manager, talking about risks of the project, which you have already talked to with the project manager. Yeah. So I think this is really crucial on how can we combine or how can we integrate the change facilitation into the project approach, so that it's not feeling like an additional topic.
That's interesting, because I mean, the example I can give there is I'm working with a client right now implementing our process management solution. They already have like 12 years of experience with another vendor, which originally was a little bit more coming from the EA side, but not a bit in between. But anyway, so from a mindset, the customer already knows pretty well what to do. But still, one of the first things that we've done is we basically invested time to go on site with the customer for about a day or three, where the first day we really dove deep into the why are you doing this and how would you articulate that. And then what they did very cleverly, I would say, and that ties right into that change facilitation part, is say, okay, we have identified 5 stakeholder groups, and while you're here, let's have a meeting with all of them for like 2 hours and explain to them, this is what we want to achieve, this is what we're going to do, and what are your concerns. And then you can drop in. So in this case, you can drop in whenever you want to just give context and blah, blah, blah. But that really worked wonderfully, I would say.
Sounds very, very cool. Yeah. I would love that. In so many projects, it would be helpful to have them involved early on. Especially also I mean, you have a additional challenge in software, in standard software projects, because you cannot really involve the people to determine how it actually looks like in the future. It's a standard project. You want to go to a standard process in the end. So it's somehow already predetermined how it will look like. At least it feels like that.
Yeah. And that's, of course, interesting when you talk about BPM software, that there's a double-edged sword here, because one, you're talking about the way that you document processes. So the process of a BPM tool is how to document and manage and optimize processes. And the BPM software itself typically is cloud software that you can configure it a little bit, but that there's no customization. And there shouldn't be, because it's relatively standard. So there is a standard component describing the things that are hardly any time standard, the processes. So that sometimes I think that dichotomy is quite paradoxal, just to use some big words on a Friday afternoon.
Absolutely. And it's also a paradox that in these kind of software implementations, you talk like 90% about those process steps and the functionalities required for the software. But if we are honest, in the daily work of the users, they spend probably 70-80% of their time on the exceptions, which the software doesn't manage at all.
Yeah.
So
fair enough.
You tell them that everything will change, but in the end, only like 30% of that day will change, because the rest is anyways out of the system. And so you create a lot of fear and anxiety. But why? So if you would really switch perspective and look into how does the overall process look like, the working day of the affected employees, then it would look completely different. And you could also communicate completely different. But that really requires some time to get into their heads, into their daily work, to maybe shadow them for a day or two and understand what's really the impact. And
walk a mile, walk a couple of miles in their shoes.
But that's, Stefan, that's where they come up with, that's where they say, okay, let's just get the standard implemented and we'll do the process optimization later. We'll look into that later. We'll do that in the second phase. And then you say, so, and the never phase.
Yeah, exactly. Scope never.
Scope never. Yeah, but I'm not saying it doesn't. There are, but it is obviously seems to be such a huge budget pressure on the project just to get the, let's say, the IT up and running, that exactly these aspects of the process really are neglected, and that is frustrating. And I've hardly ever seen that people were managing to be honest about how this is catered for, because ultimately the storyline at the beginning is, yes, this is a platform for future growth and optimization, and it's going to be awesome and everything's going to be great. But ultimately then when people see that their requirements and their day-to-day pain they have is not really being addressed, that it is frustrating. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? And when you're done, Russell, can I ask a question? I got one more, but finish first.
Come.
I would also have a question to you.
Good.
Okay. Then come on.
Guests go first. So Stefan, your question first, and I'll hold my question until after that.
Right. So I'm wondering if you have any clue on why the process models in place so rarely really cover the actual process of the employees and focus so much on specifics of the process instead.
When you say the process of the employees, are you then referring to the actual work instruction level or still the aggregated process level?
Well, it's a process that would include all the steps of the tasks they need to accomplish.
Okay. Oh, that's an
because of
question.
levels of processes, I'm always a bit careful.
Yeah. Me too.
Well, from my view, I would say a lot of the times, I think the companies in these big transformations, they struggle on having a higher level mid-management view on which processes involved with which people are required, which need to be aligned to make this whole thing happen in an integrated manner to get an overarching alignment end-to-end on the targets of your operating model, your business model, down to the level of this is the IT has to cater for these use cases. And then when we go a level deeper, I'm with you, Stefan, then say similar to the requirements, people are saying, I will take care of that later, or we'll do a work instruction. And I'm not sure if they're if the let's say, first of all, in the big transformations, there is time to go down to that level, and a lot of the time it's just put down to say local optimization, and I think that can be justified if you say, as long as you serve you define your required inputs and you serve the required outputs. However you optimize and let's say set up your process in detail, it's more or less up to you as a, let's say, process expert or process owner. And do you have to document that? So it's like, do you have to, if you see that for yourself a process model helps you, do it. But it's not necessarily something the governance dictates to you that you have to document it in such a detailed manner. You just have to manage it.
Yeah.
Just
let me add on to that, because I agree, Russell. But I think that the process as a concept just describes what needs to happen in what specific sequence and who's responsible. The way that people execute that, to me, is typically more captured in the work instruction level or the standard operating procedure. And the question that you will always have there is, are you applying process classification? In other words, do you make a distinction between, I have non-differentiating processes that needs to be standardized, and you just need to do it this way because it will give us a lot of efficiency, versus do we have differentiating processes where we differentiate ourselves in the marketplace, and then we need to give the people who execute the process much more, let's say, intellectual freedom to figure out how they want to do it. But if you don't make that distinction, you will always have that balancing act at a let's say work instruction level to say, okay, which part of this is mandatory for everybody and which part is more or less free flowing, and any type of mix in between. Does that make sense, Stefan?
Yeah, I think so. And you mentioned responsibility in your explanation.
Yeah.
And I think it's funny to have a standard software supporting standard processes, and then everyone can just decide on who's responsible to run which of these steps, because then you lack the standardization of the organization. So what's the what's the target of standardizing just the software? If then the organization can deal with it however they want, so it's really something schizophrenic for me.
Okay, but normally when I talk about responsibility, I never talk about people. I always talk about roles, and you can define a standard role for a standard process, and you can assign that role into multiple positions that you assign to people. So that's one way typically for organizations to bridge the gap between I have an organizational structure on one hand, and I have roles that need to be the actors in a process. So there is a disconnect between the two, which might facilitate that.
And it's a lot of times it's one of the most challenging parts of ERP implementations, right?
Oh, for sure.
Figure out how you do the roles and authorization, because in small entities, then everyone gets the same.
I had exactly this conversation.
Exactly. That's, I think, the point where sometimes the limits of process documentation on that level just are in the way of getting down to the nitty gritty. So to ultimately, it's a blueprint of processes that you guide you in implementing your system. But when it comes down to rolling out a template, how often do we see that, as you said, around the roles concept, around certain details that have to be implemented because we have certain on-site, say physical limitations that restrict you in implementing the template as it was thought, and you have to then come up with variants and versions. So I think that this to a certain extent, a lot of the process models we see are generalizations on an let's say higher level that have to be then interpreted according to certain, let's say, guidelines that are described there. I am with you though, Stefan, that a lot of these process models are too IT driven from, say, big IT, let's say, projects, and the topic around business rules and guidelines. And even a lot of the times the alignment on metrics around this. So how do people have a guidance to say, what am I actually trying to achieve? So an output is defined, but really say the overarching why, and the purpose of the process in the chain, and the communication of, say, what are the guardrails in which you want to operate and get this thing done, despite your, maybe say, your physical setup and your organizational setup. There, I think a lot of process documentation and process management is lacking. That's where too little thought and too little documentation is put into actually aligning with the management, top level, mid-level management, down to the detailed operations of people doing it, on a common understanding of how do we want to work from an ethical, sustainable, economical perspective, to bring this all together. Do the process document, process templates or the process documents or the process models really help transport that? That's what I would question. That's why I think there's a lot of ground that people could do, put more effort into it.
And it could be a great tool for organizational development and breakdown of strategy. If you would utilize the process structures to really break down the targets of each individual process and how it contributes to the overall vision, it would be a very strong communication means. But coming back to the thought before, I think this is exactly the difference between BPM and change facilitation, because whereas you kind of cut it on the roles level and just say, okay, and then the organization needs to deal with that, in change you cannot do that.
No, I know.
That's exactly where you need to put then the emphasis on, and you need to ensure that the local leadership team has the empowerment to really take those decisions. And
sure.
And they need to be enabled to really understand how their decisions will impact their daily work. So you need to make sure that then these people who need to kind of resolve this issue around roles and positions and people, they really need to have a sound understanding of what you actually want to do and how the software is dealing and all that. And I'm not sure if we are always doing a good job in that.
No, but I mean, I totally get that. And working in change facilitation, the object that you're working on is a human being, and that's much more complex than any process in the world. But it does bring me, and I need to be, and Russell knows this, I'm the timekeeper, so we need to start wrapping this up. But I do have my question that I still need to ask you. And it also comes back to the human nature. Now, what I run into very often is a client is running a incumbent BPM platform. They decided to move to another one, in this case ours, but it could be anything. And then the question always is, do I clean up my data in the old tool, bring it into the new tool in pristine condition, or do I might lift and shift every bit of crap into the new tool and then I use the new tool to optimize it? Russell now looks at me like, have you ever had that question? Yes, I get that question almost every project.
No, it's just that I don't know how you bridge the gap from change facilitation to shit in, shit out, kind of like in a tool.
No, hear me out.
Hey,
no,
you know.
I can make that bridge.
Okay, take me to the bridge.
Here's the bridge, because this is what I explain to customers. And I just want to get your perspective, Stefan, on this. At the moment that you say, I lift and shift my crap from the old incumbent platform into the new one, then the first experience that users will have with your new tool is shitty information. And from a change management perspective, it's my belief that the change that they already need to go through is from one system to another. So they go into a new way of working. You don't want to put on top of that the fact that they are confronted with crappy data.
Yeah. For the acceptance of the users, I would definitely agree. It needs to be cleaned before. Otherwise,
the acceptance of the users is what drives your adoption in the long run. In the end, that's my conviction.
But at least for the tool implementation.
So you're saying tidy it up. I think maybe you just have to. So I'm always astonished when people say, like also with HANA implementations, they say, should we go greenfield? And you're thinking, God, they've invested so much time in developing this system. And now they really come to the point where they say, let's just start fresh. And so in an IT environment, it's astonishing how many companies think it would be maybe a good idea to take the old system because they've invested so much in it, and it's so
that's a
really
sunken
thought
cost
in that.
fallacy.
But then ultimately, if they really look into it, they say we need to start fresh. And that, I think, that's why I was pulling my face a bit, because then for BPM, even more so, you're not just buying it, you're buying a tool for a reason, because you realize that you're limited, you've been limited in your thinking, in the way you set up your data, your architecture, etc., etc. So with a new tool should come a new thinking and a new architecture, and rethink your processes and take that as a shift. I would say, but if it's just something technical, there's always some technical.
I guess we are back to the why. Why are you implementing?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And even though I don't agree, I don't even disagree with you, Russell. But the actual content of the processes is not necessarily different. Even though if you move to a new way of thinking and you can redistribute it over a new architecture and a new governance, that's fine. But the way that you do procurement doesn't really change if you change the BPM platform.
But we're talking about the process documentation and
but
the
that's
way it's been sliced and diced and maybe thought about from the maps. It can be limiting if you have a very functional, structured like processes that are documented in a manner that they're not globalizable. That you say this is a template that we can use. So I think there's different aspects where you would say, why are you changing the tool, and what you want to achieve with the new tool, and then you realize, I need a new architecture. I need to clean up my data. I need a new revamp of my approach on thinking process management. But maybe just wrapping up a bit.
Yes,
please.
You
were saying timekeeper. So what I really like about this, so from what we've talked about, ultimately, I think Stefan, when I think about what you're saying about the change facilitation, what I really liked is a lot of process management is conducted on a more generalized blueprint, centralized, standardized view. If you want to get processes implemented, which is ultimately must be the goal of any BPM organization, you have to take it to the ground. And with all the talks about sponsorship and human affairs, to get a process implemented, you need change facilitation, big time.
Yeah. Nice bridge, Russell.
So I really think that fundamentally taking whatever blueprint we have on process management, making it real, making people live this, you need change facilitation. Yeah, and if it's in the heart of the people working in BPM, or if it's a longer project that they engage with guys like you, Stefan, it's making like this business readiness, implementing processes for real. It's the most essential part is to really get down to the change facilitation and bringing the processes to the people and let's say making them manifest themselves in the hearts and the heads and the tools on site. So and that's why I think it's a real great kind of like level going down to the shop floor and facilitating change for real. Exactly.
Staying in BPM, the process architects and the process experts, they do already need the company to be accompanied.
Yeah. I mean, that's what they do. That's their job, and you're the guy to help them do it in an efficient manner. So
I mean, that means that Russell and Stefan, I mean, we're coming to the end of this, and I think you very eloquently put it. Implementing BPM means implementing a process at the shop floor level. That's what we're talking about. And you need change facilitation for that. And if you don't do that, your process is doomed, period. I mean, I think that's it. And having said that, I mean, Stefan, it was absolutely a pleasure having you today on the show.
Oh, thanks to you.
Yeah, Russell, thank you too. I wish you all a very pleasant weekend. We're recording this on a Friday, so we can say that. And to our dear listeners, thank you for sticking with us again, and speak to you next time. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.